as Paula was saying, obviously, then all the work that's gone into this and the background to it, ultimately it comes down to, you being able to find the documents on this Public Contract Scotland tender site, submit it, and obviously get as much information in as you can, just outlining, your capacity, your capability. It's not a time to be shy with these things. So, as I say, it's really a bit of a kind of sales job, just to get over as much as you can, everything that you've got to offer. I think the reason that it's good to include a bit of time on this PCS tender site is just for folk that haven't seen it before. Unfortunately, I've seen a few instances where people have maybe got a bit lost with the site or not found information, and at the end of the day, not submitted the bid in time. So there is a kind of user's guide which I'll supply through to Elizabeth, and I think will be made available to everyone. But I thought it's worth doing a kind of online demo as we can, rather than screenshots. So Public Contract Scotland tender, there are a bit of confusion about what's Public Contract Scotland and what's Public Contract Scotland tender. When the notice comes out, it will be featured on Public Contract Scotland. And for those that have registered and ticked the right alert boxes, you'll get an email saying here's one you might be interested in. It will then refer you to Public Contract Scotland tender, which is a different portal, and you have to register separately for it. You can link your registrations, but I tend to keep mine separate. So Public Contract Scotland tender, it's where obviously this opportunity is going to appear. If you're not registered, you'll see obviously there's a link here, register as a supplier. It must be because I'm already registered, it won't let me do that part of it. Okay. You need to click on register as a supplier, and that will take you through the process. Because I'm already registered, I think that's the problem with that one. What it will give you, obviously, is some standard questions to fill in. There are questions with a red asterisk beside them. These are the mandatory ones that you have to complete to go through your registration. So you can look out for that. Once you're registered, you'll get an email through from Public Contract Scotland tender, basically saying your registration is now complete. You obviously have to submit usernames and passwords. So just make sure you remember your username and your password when you then go to look at the system. So the notice will appear on Public Contract Scotland. It will have a submission date, an end date, whereby obviously your tender, your submission has to be sent in. Make a note of that date, because when you go onto this system, there's various ways you can filter and search, but I actually find knowing the end date is one of the best ways to do it. As a project, I'd imagine it's a single procurement document, so it's not a complete invite to tender as such, with a whole kind of commercial section and prices to fill in. So the single procurement document, as it were, is normally advertised under a PQQ, a Pre-Qualification Questionnaire. So when you're in PCS tender, click on that link. It then brings up all the PQQs open to suppliers. So everything that's been advertised there just now. As I say, normally I would look for the time limit for expressed an interest and then go by that date. There are some filters here, because as you can see when you go on, there's a lot of DPS systems, telephone communications. There's a lot of opportunities on here. It probably got up to 100 odds or more than that. So when you're looking for something, if you know that end date, it's an easy way to find it. Once you've had a look at and you've found the one that you're looking for, obviously the one from City of Edinburgh has not been published yet, so I can't show you that one. But let's have a look and see if there's something which hopefully might be along similar lines. And there's a single procurement document here. If you click on it, and that's giving you a wee bit more detail about exactly what it is. An Advanced Manufacturing Innovation District Scotland, AMIDS. Thank goodness for that, because I would never guess what the acronym was there. But that's then giving you a bit of information here about what the project is, the name of the buyer, the contracting authority, the closing date, whereby your submission has to be in, and closing time, end date for supplier clarification messages. On this system, when you get to the one you're looking for, you may have a question about the specification, or you're a wee bit unsure what's been looked for. So the system allows you to ask questions of the buyer. But there is an end date whereby that's a cut-off for supplier messages. So that's one thing to check for when you get on the system. So once you've found the one for City of Edinburgh, you make sure you're on the right one. If you're not on the right one, it's not a problem, because you can just decide later, and that gets you back out onto the main list of PQQs again. Because we thought this one might be of interest, it might be along similar lines, I'm going to express an interest in it. And you'll see, I'll just take you through the process. So express an interest in it. What it's saying is this will move it to your My PQQs area, and you'll have the option to review all the details, download buyer attachments, send and receive messages. Okay, that's one that we're interested in. So we're going to say okay to that. So it's now telling us we've now expressed an interest, we've invited ourselves to participate. And again, you know, it entitles you to download any buyer attachments, receive messages, respond to the PQQ. You'll see that it's quite intuitive in terms of the guidance that it gives you. So, you know, for an old technophobe like me, once you've kind of worked with it for a wee while, it does kind of guide you through how the process works. So it's telling you to select My Response, then click Create Response in order to start completing your document, and then submit your completed response to the buyer. And again, a reminder there that you submit your response to the buyer by the closing date and time. So we'll say okay for that, which is fine. And here we're into the document here, but it's got 15 buyer attachments. It's given us a wee bit more detail on what the response is, etc. So what I'm going to do is go back to the list. And this time I'm going to go to My PQQs, because that's what the system is telling us. And appeared in here now is the one that we expressed an interest in. So that's now moved from this general section into the My PQQs. So I'm going to click on this. And again, this is asking here, I've got the opportunity, I can decline it, or I can intend to respond. So because I'm interested in doing this one, and it won't actually let me complete anything until I intend to respond. So I'll click on that. So as the system again is just guiding me through, it's telling me I've now started to complete my response. It's telling me I need to click the edit response buttons to access the questionnaire and complete it. It's reminding me that all the mandatory questions have to be completed. And these are the ones with a red asterisk. If you don't, or if you fail to complete one of these mandatory questions, when you actually go to press submit, obviously down here eventually, the system won't let you submit. It will just refer you back and tell you that you haven't fulfilled all the mandatory fields. This bottom one may seem straightforward, but I have actually worked with a couple of suppliers in the past who filled the whole document in and then actually forgot to press submit response. it seems a real fundamental error, but in actual fact, if you're caught up in other work, another business, and some telephone calls, whatever else, you know, it does happen. What I would say was, again, just based on experience, try where you can to maybe have a date in your diary, maybe a couple of days before, to make sure that this has actually been submitted. You know, nobody wants to be running at the last minute at 10 to 12 trying to submit a document which is due to be in by 12 o'clock. It's not good. System problems, which I've had recently, can go down. You know, a lot of work and effort can be lost by the very fact that you haven't been able to submit your response on time. It's a kind of electronic system. You know, if the offers are not in time, then basically that everything can be lost, and the buyer maybe has no kind of latitude to whatever to come back and give you any opportunity to submit after the closing date time. So it's worth treating it as any kind of project and get something in the diary. So here we are. I think through speaking to Paula and her colleagues, I think you'll only see one qualification response, and we can have a quick chat at the end of this. The qualification one is really the kind of single procurement document, but obviously the kind of space is limited on it in terms of what you can put in an ask. So sometimes what buyers do is also do a technical response, which is basically just kind of further supplementary questions. So just depending on many questions and information that City of Edinburgh need, they may have to use both of these documents. But as you'll see, the system here is showing the documents that need to be filled in. Don't panic when it tells you here that the qualification response is 224 questions. Because if you look up, the missing mandatory responses are 22. So that's an awful lot easier. And let's just start. Remember, it told me I had to edit the response to fill anything in. So I'm going to edit the response here. And we'll start to just pan down these questions. So you can see asterisk one, mandatory field. And this one presumably will just be a drop down. Yeah, yes, no type thing. A lot of the questions are along the same lines. So name will be company organisation name, part number, ID, postal address. You can see how many of these are. I mean, put them in if you have them. If you don't have them, as I say, they're not mandatory. It's only the mandatory ones that you need to make sure you've covered. A lot of standard information. What I would say was as you keep going down, save at the top. It can be pretty frustrating when you put a lot of this information in. This is already filled actually something in here for me. It must have been one I've done before. So you can save up at the top and keep saving as you go along, because I say you could, you know, be down to question 2A, 15, whatever. Some of these have actually. What happens if you've used PCST before on another bid? Then what happens is it will actually pull through the information that you've completed on that previous bid. So because I've worked on a previous bid on this system, it's obviously can retain some of that information and pulled it through. Really useful if you're bidding on a, you know, frequent basis, but not so useful if you're only doing it as a kind of one-off. You'll see questions here, micro enterprises, you know, refer to definition of small and medium business, because it's going to ask you questions about the size of your organisation. So it's actually giving you the definitions above there. Supported business, that's normally like probably kind of employed type organisation, employing a percentage of kind of disabled employees. So, you know, there's a big supported business in Glasgow, blindcraft industry, so Royal Strathclyde blindcraft industry. So yeah, it's unlikely that, I don't know in terms of if you'll be, you know, a supported business in terms of definition. Sometimes you've got to keep reading the questions. So If you're a UK business, please select not applicable. So you've got to read the whole of the text there to obviously get the gist, just in terms of they're looking for. Are you proceeding with others? The single procurement documents are kind of menu of questions. So the buyers select the questions which they think are appropriate. A lot of them are kind of standard as these ones, but obviously you may see some slight deviations in terms of the ones that come through on the actual SPD document that you're going to be filling in, single procurement. So if I said yes to this, you'll see it then opens up further information about if you're bidding as with others, well, who's going to be leader of the group, who's responsible, whose name is going to be on, I suppose, the terms, conditions, who are the other people participating in the bid. And for this one, if you are working with partners, there's a document here that you need to download. It'll be a Word document, and then fill it in and then upload it back for each of the participants. And obviously you can understand the reasoning why the council need to know exactly who's going to be providing the services here, who's responsible primarily for leading the group, but who are the constituent parts of the group as well. So there's quite a few of these questions where if you tick a yes to it, it will then open up other parts. If I just go back to say no on that, you'll see that goes. When we're talking about who's going to be responsible, who's going to be empowered to represent the bidder, then that's down to the individual. Again, sometimes it's more detail asked than others on this one. They don't always ask for place of birth data, but they probably will want to know who is, the person empowered to represent the bidder, capacity of. And you'll see that these are not mandatory on this one. And what you just need to do is the one that you're completing, focus on these mandatory ones first. Sometimes I've seen this as a mandatory, but it's not on this one. And it's basically, it could be the same address, postcode as you've given previously in terms of the organisation, the body. Do you apply in the capacity of other entities? Again, if we say yes to this one, yeah, it's opening up all sorts of questions and asking for a separate single procurement document response from each of the bidders. And again, that would need to be uploaded. So there's lots of questions in here, grounds for exclusion. Is there any particular reason that you should not obviously be allowed to submit a bid? And you'll see some of these here again. Obviously, some of these have been pulled through from my previous one. But so, have you been guilty of conspiracy? If I said yes on this, it's then going to ask me for dates of conviction, reasons, identify who's been convicted, etc. I'll take that back to corruption. Yeah, these have all been filled in by me before. That's why they've pulled them through. Terrorist offences, money laundering, terrorist financing, child labour. And again, all of these will have a clause about date of conviction, reasons, who's been convicted. Have you taken measures to demonstrate your reliability despite the existence of a relevant ground for exclusion? You might think that it's highly unlikely, to be honest, that there's any grounds that you might be considered for child labour and other forms of trafficking, and I think I would agree with you. But I've seen one on health and safety where there was a question about have you been found guilty through health and safety executive, whatever, for failings of health and safety on site. It was a construction one, and the company had actually received a warning through health and safety executive who happened to witness two of their employees in site on a roof without wearing protective clothing and not conforming to the standard safety practice. When the company under this one, where the company actually got an opportunity to say, you know, yes, this did happen, and yes, obviously we got this conviction through, but here's what we've done, all the reasons why it happened, that basically, you know, the staff have been given full training, full PPE, they were monitored, whatever. It was basically 2 staff that, you know, were not following all the processes and procedures. And what they said was they'd be retrained, etc., etc. So, you know, it's not always an absolute no. There is an opportunity on some of these things, I think, if there has been a problem, to resolve it. But I think there's ones like child labour and drug trafficking, etc., may be very difficult to come back from. So you can see there's quite a lot. Have you met obligations in respect to taxes, payment of social security? These are all kind of standard ones that would normally appear. Social law, environmental law, labour law, bankrupt. With the credit, any analogous situation basically means in any kind of similar situation, national laws and regulations. So assets administered by liquidator. As I say, that, you know, as you fill all these in, just keep going back and saving, because ultimately, as I say, you take a phone call, we're quite far down this document, but you could have lost a lot of information, so you don't want to be having to go back and fill all that in again. And we're still going down. Have you had a contract taken off you before? Serious misrepresentation and supplying information, etc. This one's asking about, I know Paula talked obviously about kind of registrations, etc. So, you know, relevant trade registers, Fair Commission, etc. could be in terms of what's looked for here. This one's asking for yearly turnover specified in a notice, so you might need to refer back to the notice. This one's actually given you number of financial years 3, minimum required turnover. It's more than substantial, but it must be relevant to the market that they're dealing with here. So you can see there is information in there. Yearly turnover, financial ratios. You sometimes get asked for financial ratios, assets against liabilities type thing. Financial requirements. So there's an information instruction document which must be about the buyer attachments, which we can have a look at. Document to fill in. Instruction attachment on that one, yeah. Health and safety questions. Quality assurance standards. Quality assurance schemes. These are things that a lot of suppliers will have, you know, kind of staff handbooks as a means of ensuring staff all conform to kind of quality standards, quality policies, method statements, instructions, guidance, procedures. You know, there's all sorts of, a lot of companies now work with kind of questionnaires, customer satisfaction questionnaires that they can work on, maybe complaints processes. So these are all things that, you know, in terms of quality assurance, that suppliers can say that we've got in place to try and ensure that, you know, the services being provided are meeting the kind of levels that, you know, under key performance or service levels, that we are meeting these standards. And obviously, if there's inspection by external bodies, all that information can be put towards ensuring kind of quality standards. This one's also asking about environmental management schemes. Do you have the kind of normal ones in ISO 14001? If I say no to that, it'll ask us then, what do we have? Do you have an environmental policy, an environmental management statement? Is there anything in place which shows that you are trying to be a sustainable provider in terms of your operations? Very difficult for small suppliers. I mean, myself, kind of working from an office or at home, there's very little waste that I can actually produce on environmental improvements I can make, apart from kind of, you know, using public transport or using Zoom, Teams, etc. for meetings, etc. But there are one or two things, obviously, and just in terms of the kind of basics that you can look at if you don't have anything. And again, there's some mandatory information down at the bottom here to fill in. And there's also a declaration certificate, which they're telling you here, you must download that document and then attach it in the technical envelope. So what we're going to save here, okay, and again, it's taking me through the system. So that's taking me back to where we were here. The buyer attachments that we've talked about. Obviously, we want to log on to the buyer attachments. And it's just giving you all the different documents that are in here. I mean, these documents could be anything from, you know, the standard, I suppose, terms and conditions. They could be form of tender sometimes, no collusion, standard certificates that public sector kind of asked for, specifications of service, etc. So that all that information in there, I would suggest that, you know, you download it, have a look at it, to see exactly what's involved. I'll not click on any of these just now because I've opened them, and obviously it might then slow the system up a wee bit. I'm just conscious at the time I've got here. You can never really get lost within the system, because if you go back to my response every time, it will take you back to where you were. There are no messages, and I talked earlier about messages on this system. If there's anything you're unsure of, I would always suggest that you ask a question. Your question and the answer will be visible to everyone who participates and has expressed an interest in this opportunity. So, you know, just anonymize it. But it's obviously to make sure that everybody's getting the same information. So your question goes into the buyer. They'll then put out a standard response, as I say, and everybody will see your question and the answer to make sure everybody's getting the same information. Normally with the kind of tenders that I'm involved in, it's highly unlikely that you'll be able to ask a personal direct question of the buyers involved in the process. But, you know, if there's anything at all you're unsure of, use that system, use that message system. Again, you just need to create a message, and then it'll allow you to take you through the process to send that message in. So don't make assumptions about anything is all I would say. Answer, get clarity if you're unsure. You know, you put a lot of work and effort into these things, so you just want to make sure, as I say, you're on the right lines with it. Once you've filled in, and again, that's taking me back to edit the response. If I tried to submit this just now, and obviously I haven't completed the mandatory questions, it's telling me there, you haven't completed them. Click the validate response to highlight the questions. So, you know, you can't submit something before it's ready to be sent in to the buyer. The other thing as well with this system, if you submit your response ahead of the closing date, you can actually go into it and resubmit it if there's more information comes to hand or more information you want to put in. You can keep resubmitting right up to the closing date and time, and it's only the last submission that will be available to the buyer. So, as I say, don't panic if you've sent it in early, whatever, because you can go back into it and do that again. And this one is a technical response, as we talked about. And that will just be kind of standard questions. Yeah, and again, they're asking for examples, previous works carried out, and there must be a document here which you can then fill in and attach. Yeah, additional files. So a lot of these must be in these buyer documents that we looked at earlier that we didn't open up, and a lot of these need to be submitted. Again, as you complete these documents, you can just attach them. I always find with tenders where there's lots of documents to submit, rather than try and do it at the end in a bit of a rush, and there's a danger you might submit the wrong one in the wrong place, you can do it a wee bit earlier. When you're working your way through the document, you can save it as you go along. Just keep saving the changes, and that's the validate one, which will show you if you've submitted all the mandatory questions, if you've completed them. Just keep saving the changes. This is a wee bit of a misnomer because it says save and exit response. And I think a lot of folks have come across think if I hit this, it's going to take me right out of the system. And you'll see it doesn't, it just takes you back to the main area here. The benefit of saving as you go along is, apart from, as I say, that make sure that you don't lose anything, this system times you out very regularly. I'm not sure if it's kind of 15 minutes, but it seems to be less than that. So as I say, if you've put a lot of information in, then go to answer a telephone call or speak to a colleague, whatever, you can come back and the system's shut you down and that information will be lost. So as you keep going through it, just save it. And ultimately, when you've finished, you know, make sure you go to submit it. Once you submit it, you'll actually get an email from the PCST saying your offer has been received. So you know that actual it's actually gone into the buyer. And as I say, this is an electronic system which the buyers cannot open. They cannot go in and look at anybody's bid, etc., until the system allows them to do that. I wonder, just very quickly, let's just look at one that just want to see if there was one might have had messages and things in it, just to let you see. Yeah, so here's one here. So just click on the message. I tend to respond to that. This one's got 24 buyer attachments, so a lot of reading to do to that if you were interested in bidding for it. Message unread. Receive messages. And that's just bringing up, obviously, mini competition message about it. So I'll just go back to list on this one. Right, hopefully that's giving you some a kind of guidance ideas for how to fill in this document when it comes out. As I say, the system is pretty intuitive. It takes you through the process. It gives you kind of, you know, alerts on screen as to you really want to do this, and by doing this, you're going to do this, etc. So, you know, you can't really go wrong with it, but it's good to get in and get a wee play around with it in advance of obviously the opportunity coming out. I think unless there's any questions on that, we can maybe go on obviously to questions now anyway, and I'll